Hi, it's Penny here, and today we're going to be talking about all the books that I read in August. And this is quite late, but I do think it will be interesting to see what I think of these books after we've had a few months to either forget the boring stuff and just hold on to like the best and the worst of things. Now, as usual, I am going to do this book battle style where I pair up all the books and I battle them against each other until we come up with the best book of the month. But also this month, there's two kind of main categories of books that I read. Firstly, we've got new releases that I was, in some cases, sucked into reading. And we've also got series that I was continuing. So let's talk first about the four newer releases that I read. There's one that maybe is not quite as new as the others. So our first battle is going to be between The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager and So Happy for You by Celia Laskey. So The House Across the Lake is the first Riley Sager book I've read, I believe. This is a thriller where this woman who is a celebrity is basically had some tragic events happen to her, but also has done some fairly career destroying things. So she has gone to her family's lake house to try and recover, take some time for herself. But while she's there, she becomes obsessed with watching this other celebrity couple across the lake through their big, beautiful glass windows. And she sees some things that make her quite worried. However, this is one of these stories where she is an unreliable narrator because she's heavily alcoholic, drinking all the time, so you're never really sure what's real. As well, this is one where there are supernatural elements hinted and you don't know is it actually supernatural or not. Personally, I have discovered that I don't really like thrillers that don't make it clear right from the front whether it's really supernatural or not, which is interesting because I quite like fantasy books. So you might think I like thrillers that turn out to have a supernatural element or at least hint at a supernatural element. But it turns out I don't like that. I just want to know either it's supernatural and I can dig right into the fantasy of things, or it's not supernatural and I can really think about the reality of the thrilling situation. I don't want blurred lines in the middle. So I think with this one, I really enjoyed the beginning where I was picking up on all the clues about what was going on. However, the ideas that I had in my head about what might be happening were much more interesting to me than what actually ended up happening. So I ended up being very disappointed with the ending. And I think with thrillers, if the ending isn't something you enjoy, then that can have quite a big impact on your enjoyment. So this one was okay. I didn't think it was terrible, but it wasn't a favorite. Then we're going to battle that book against So Happy for You by Celia Laskey. Now, I have since I read this, seen a lot of people were expecting a thriller for this, and there are some elements of it trying to be a thriller, but I think if you go into it expecting it to be a thriller, then you're probably going to be disappointed. But also, I feel like this book didn't really know what it wanted to be. The main premise of the story is that we have this woman who doesn't really believe in marriage, but her best friend convinces her to be her maid of honor. There's also this weird dystopian element where it's hinting at people having started to do some very strange things about marriage. And there's a lot of critique in there about marriage, but what was weird for me is that it was kind of trying to be dystopian, like talking about people making human sacrifices so their marriage would be successful and other things. But most of the other things, I couldn't tell, is this meant to be a dystopian thing? Or is this like just a slightly over-the-top explanation of the way people treat marriage now? Because let's be honest, some people are very over-the-top about marriage. Now, what interested me in this book is that I don't really believe in marriage. I'm not interested in marriage. Fine if you want to do it, but not my thing for sure. And so I thought this book might have some interesting commentary on it. I was expecting a bit of a dystopian, I think, but it wasn't dystopian enough for me. It was kind of just the way things are with a little bit of human sacrifice on top of things. But also like this woman and the friendship she had with this woman who was getting married, that was just a terrible friendship, and the main character was so unlikable that just everything she was thinking was just annoying. And even when I agreed with her, often her explanations of why she thought things was so off base that I didn't enjoy reading it at all. And then just everything that happened didn't really make a lot of sense. I still don't think this book knew what it wanted to be. So I'm not a big fan of thrillers, but if I had to recommend one of these two, I would definitely recommend The House Across the Lake. So that's the one we're going to put through to the next round. Then the other two newer releases I read are both science fictions. So we've got A Prayer for the Crown Shy by Becky Chambers up against Here and Then and Now by Chen. So, A Prayer for the Crown Shy, I think you can tell by the fact that I actually own it when I usually just read books from the library or get secondhand ones, but this is a beautiful new book. Could it be? Because this was my most anticipated book release of the year. This is the sequel to A Psalm for the Well-Built, which currently my sister is borrowing because I just loved it so much that I convinced her she needed to read it, and I will be lending this one to her next, I'm pretty sure. But this basically is following this tea monk who decides to go out into the world and figure out what they want to do next. And while they're out there, they run into this robot called, what's his name? Moscap. And Moscap has basically come as a representative for the robots to find out how the humans are doing, because in this world, at one point the robots gained their own consciousness. They decided they didn't really want anything to do with humans anymore, so they went out into the forest and said, please could you leave us alone, humans? And the humans said, okay. So the humans had to figure out a way of living without robots. And I think part of what I love about this series so much is just that it's kind of a look at how the world could be better. Not exactly a utopian, but utopian-like. But not one of those utopians where it's actually a dystopian once you dig into it. This is just a lot of people trying to live their best life at peace with nature. This particular book has a big section about an alternative version of money. There's just a lot of philosophy as Moscap asks these very strange questions of Dex, because Moscap is a robot and has no conception of all these human things that Dex just takes for granted. The only thing that I would say bad about this book was that it turns out this is only a duology. I was not expecting that. And so when I realized that this was the end, I wasn't very happy, because I just want to keep traveling around with Moscap and Dex and seeing them trying to figure out what they want to do with their lives. And by the end of this, they're kind of in the state where they're like, we don't know what we want to do next. We just want to enjoy ourselves. And like, that's such a great message. But like, they're still going to travel around. They're still going to have more adventures. And why don't I get to go too, you know? So if you haven't read this book series, it's really lovely. Normally I like things that are a little bit more dark and twisty, but this series has really captured my heart. It's one of my favorites. So then we're going to put that up against Here and Then and Now by Chen. This book I picked up because, one, it's a time travel book and I love time travel books. As well, it was on a Goodreads list of like the most popular science fiction books in the last 3 years or something like that. So I'd gone through that list and decided which ones from that list I wanted to read. This was one of them. It says that it's about this guy who's like a time travel agent who goes around. I can't remember what the premise is. What's he even trying to do? I actually just gave a synopsis of the book, but I'm going to cut it out because spoilers, I think. I think the premise on the back of the book is just that he's a retired time travel agent and then he has to kind of get back into time travel in order to save his daughter. And that is accurate, but it's also not accurate because there's some twists and turns along the way. And so I think high level, this story was okay, but it's more of like an emotional story about this broken relationship between this father and the daughter, and the time travel is more just a framing for that, whereas the time travel I prefer is more like that twisty time travel where there's lots of like connections and things that have caused themselves to happen, or like multiverse, crazy multiverse stuff. I like it when time travel gets twisty. This was not a twisty time travel book. This was an emotional time travel book. And family emotional stories are not really my thing. I don't know though whether it would be the kind of thing that people who like emotional family stories would like either. So I'm not sure it did that well or the time travel thing well. It was more of a mix. It was okay though. I didn't have a terrible time. I did listen to it via audiobook and I do think that audiobook was quite good from what I remember. It's been a long time now. But anyway, if we're going to put Here and Then and Now up against A Prayer for the Crown Shy, I think you can tell that I'm going to pick A Prayer for the Crown Shy. So then, before we move on to the series I was continuing, we may as well pick out what was the best new release that I've read for the month. Again, I feel like you can tell, but we're going to put The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager up against A Prayer for the Crown Shy. I'm not going to muck around. Obviously, you know, A Prayer for the Crown Shy won because it just was like beautiful, cozy philosophy with a robot that just like makes you think about things in such different ways and is so entertaining, and just so many ideas about how the world could be a much nicer place for everyone, and like all these stories about emotional connection. Whereas The House Across the Lake, I just don't really like thrillers with unreliable narrators. And like, did that book really have anything particularly interesting to say? No. So, A Prayer for the Crown Shy was my best newish release that I've read in the month. Now, we're going to talk about all the series that I continued, and I'm going to divide these ones into two groups, and I think I'm going to do battles of three, which isn't how I normally do it, but we've got a lot of books to get through. It's been a long time since I did a video, so let's just do it that way. And I'm going to split it up into boys and girls because that's the way that it naturally splits in half. So let's talk about the boys section. We got 3 books: The God Emperor of Dune by Frank Herbert, Lord of Chaos by Robert Jordan, and Small Favors by Jim Butcher. So these are all series that the main characters are men, and these book series are also very popular with men. However, not particularly popular with me, to be honest. So God Emperor of Dune, I think this is the 4th book in the Dune series, and I don't really like the writing style of Dune. Now, admittedly, this is a much older science fiction series, but a lot of it is just about this verbal sparring between these different characters, and they go through all these like logical hurdles, convincing themselves of different things, and like, is any of their logic even really right? Who really knows? They're constantly having these verbal sparring sessions, and some of the ideas are amazing, but some racist, sexist, homophobic, all those kind of things. So I guess, you know, it's a product of its time, but also like maybe worse than that. But there are some cool ideas. So the main plot of this particular book is that there is one character who has the ability kind of to foresee the future, and they have also done something to themselves to essentially not really be human anymore and to be able to live a very long life. And now people are treating them as if they are a god. But they as well don't really think that humans following a god is a very good idea. So they're trying to instill the ideas and the things they want to happen in the future into the culture, but they're also trying to turn humans against themselves in some way, or at least that's how I remember the story. As I said, some really amazing ideas, but just the writing style isn't for me, and some of the ideas are awful. I do think going forward I'm not going to continue this series. I might look up like on Wikipedia or something the synopsis, but I just, at this point at least, maybe if I have more time in the future, but at this point at least I think I'm done. Then we've got Lord of Chaos. This is, I don't know, I think something like the 7th book. Maybe it's the 6th book. Maybe it's the 5th book. The somethingth book in the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan. I actually quite liked the first book in the Wheel of Time series, and then pretty much progressively as I've continued through the series, I've liked each book less and less. I'm now supposed to be reading the 8th book in the series. I started listening to the audiobook. I was bored out of my mind, so I think I'm going to give the physical book a go. I do have it up on my shelf. I found it at a second-hand bookshop for $2. Maybe if I read that series physically, I will be able to care, but at the moment I feel like all the characters who were so interesting in the first book have all just become manipulative dicks, and I don't care about anything that they're trying to achieve anymore, and I don't find the world very interesting. And I know a lot of people really love how he's incorporated different cultures into the story, and maybe that's something that wasn't being done much at the time that this book series came out, but really I think modern books do a much better job of some of these things, or at least some of them do. I don't know. At the moment, I don't care. And I can't remember exactly what happened in Lord of Chaos, and I don't care what happened. Oh dear, but I really do want to continue the series. I want to at least read to the books where Brandon Sanderson took over the writing, but I've also decided that I'm not going to worry about it until next year at this point. Then we've got Small Favors by Jim Butcher. This, again, I don't know which book number in the series it is, but let's say number 10 maybe, of the Dresden Files. Editing me will correct me if I'm wrong. Thanks, editing me. So, the Dresden Files. This is all about a wizard named Harry, who's also a private investigator, and as the series continues, he gets all involved with this war between the vampires and the Wizards Council. There's also a whole bunch of fairies, the Fae, involved in the story, and all sorts of different supernatural creatures. Harry, unfortunately, is kind of a dick, so that's something I don't enjoy about this series. And I'm trying to remember exactly what happens in this one, but I think this is the one where it kind of builds up to the climax of this war, and then after this, some slightly different things were happening. So if I'm right, and that's what this one was, this had a lot of action in it, and unfortunately, I don't really like the action in the Dresden Files. What do I prefer in the Dresden Files? I don't know. Sometimes the world does interesting things. Sometimes Harry is challenged in the right way. Sometimes he has good relationships that aren't just him being creepy about the teenage girl that he mentors. Like, sometimes the Dresden Files can be okay. Book 7 was the best. And I think book 11, the next one after Small Favors, I also didn't mind. But Small Favors, yeah, too much action. I was kind of bored. So, if we are going to battle these 3 books against each other, it's actually hard because I didn't like any of them. I can't really pick Lord of Chaos as the winner because I don't remember what happened. I can't really pick Small Favors as the winner because I just didn't really like the action. Is this the one with the demon on the island though? It might. No, that was later. Okay, so there's no redeeming qualities for Small Favors. So then I guess I'm going to pick The God Emperor of Dune. It does have some good ideas. Is a really interesting look at culture and what might happen or what you might do if you could prophesize the future. So, God Emperor of Dune, best of the boys, still not that great. Now though, we're going to move on to the girls who will do much better. So firstly, we've got Fall of the Argosi and Way of the Argosi by Sebastien de Castell. I read both books in that duology. We're going to put those up against Child of Prophecy by Juliette Marillier. And then Emerald Blaze and Sapphire Flames by Ilona Andrews. I read both of those as well. So actually this is 5 books, but I've condensed it down because it's been too long and I don't think I remember the details between the books anymore because I read them one after the other as well. Anyway, let's talk about the duologies first actually. So firstly, we've got what is the duology called? I don't know. But Fall of the Argosi and Way of the Argosi. This is a duology that's actually a prequel for the Spellslinger series. I did enjoy the Spellslinger series and I think the Argosi books really build on it. I felt like the Argosi were the most interesting characters in the Spellslinger series. But as well, in the Spellslinger series, pretty much every book introduces a whole new kind of magic and a whole new cast of characters. And I wouldn't have expected the prequel books to do the same, but they did. And the magic that they introduced, in my opinion, was the most interesting. And as well, the things that Furious Parfax had to go through in this book. So Furious Parfax is the main character. She is kind of Kellen, the main character in the Spellslinger series. She's his mentor. And this is kind of her coming into her powers and becoming an Argosi. Which the Argosi are like these nomadic philosophers trying to improve the world, but we learn a lot more about the Argosi and also just like Furious Parfax's tragic past. And throughout the Spellslinger books as well, there is an Argosi called Path of Thorns and Roses, I think. Furious Parfax always just calls her Rosie, and the two of them have kind of this rivalry and don't really get along through all the Spellslinger books, and this prequel really gets into their backstory and the awful events that they went through. And I really think this prequel is so much better than the other books, and I do think you could read this prequel duology first, but I also think it might be slightly better to read it afterwards. Will also say, after I read that duology, I wanted to go back and reread the Spellslinger books because I do think it frames things that Furious Parfax is doing in a very different light. But it's been a while. I haven't considered doing that yet, but I might at some point. But also, I'd almost want to read these Argosi books again. But yes, I really enjoyed this duology. Then the next one is The Child of the Prophecy by Juliette Marillier. So this is the third book? Yes, the third book in the, wow, I don't remember the name of the series. Seven Waters, the Seven Waters series. So this is a series basically following this family through different generations. So this third book is the third generation that tragic events are happening to. After that, actually, the books don't follow down the generations. It's more the cousins and the siblings that get to tell their stories. But this one, unfortunately, I did think it was very different from the first two books. You could almost criticize the second book for being too much like the first book, but it was the same in the ways that I really liked the first book. The second one, we're following this girl who's been brought up separately from the main family. She's set up by this evil sorceress type woman to go and take revenge on the main family. But at the same time, when she gets to meet this family, she discovers that she really loves them, especially the children in the family. But she is forced into doing some really horrible things. I think as well, I'm not normally a romance reader, but one strength of these books is the romantic threads throughout the books. They're very emotional, very heartbreaking. But in this third book, I didn't feel like the romances were as good. There is the typical love triangle type thing going on, but one of the guys was just really boring and I didn't like the romance between them at all. He just wanted to like do everything for her. Didn't like him. And then the other guy was like this older man who just wanted to do horrible things to everyone, and like he's no good as a love interest. So just like the love interests weren't really doing it for me. But I did like her inner conflict about whether she should do what she's been asked to do or whether she should protect this family that she's come to love. But at the same time, the main character makes some really annoying decisions that I didn't particularly enjoy reading. So I have continued the Seven Waters series since I read this and I am still enjoying it, but this particular one is probably my least favorite of the series. And then lastly, I read the first two books from the second trilogy of the Hidden Legacy series by Ilona Andrews. This book series so far is 2 trilogy. It's possible we might get a 3rd trilogy because we're following this family with 3 daughters. The first trilogy followed Nevada, who is just trying to help the family survive. They run like a private investigation firm, but they're mainly just trying to pay the bills, but unfortunately they end up getting involved with all these very powerful families. In this world, magic is genetic, or people have these magical powers that are genetic, but there's also like the initial powers came from this serum that people found way back in ancient Egypt or something. It's quite an interesting world. It's quite an interesting world with some really interesting magical abilities, and I really love just the way Ilona Andrews creates family and relationships and the fun banter of the characters. To me, it feels very realistic, and the magical world is also very well integrated into like everything else that's happening. So the first trilogy is the older sister, then this second trilogy is about the second sister, Catalina. She's kind of had to take over leadership of this family just as they've been thrust into more of the politics of the world of these powerful families. And I wasn't expecting to like Catalina because in a lot of ways she's set up as like that pretty girl that is very fashionable and nice and everyone likes her. I thought kind of boring, but actually I ended up really liking her perspective. And her magical ability is the ability to make people fall in love with her, which again, Ilona Andrews just did such interesting stuff with that. I really am hoping that there will be another trilogy at some point that will follow the youngest sister. She is very different from the older two, so I think that could go in some really interesting directions. So fingers crossed, because I really enjoyed these 2 books, and spoilers for my next wrap up, the final book in the trilogy. I love that as well. And I think actually I should say always the disclaimer for these books is please don't judge them on the covers. They look like erotic romance books, but there's very little actual, like there's a few kissing scenes, maybe some sex scenes, but it's very minimal. It's more about the world and the magic. And like before I said with the Dresden Files, I didn't really like the action scenes, but I think Ilona Andrews writes really good action scenes that don't bore me, which is very impressive. So if we're going to put these 3 books up against each other, we're going to take off Child of the Prophecy straight away because that was my least favorite, definitely. And I did really like the other pairs of books. To be honest, I feel like the Argosi books were more emotionally affecting to me, whereas the Hidden Legacy books I really love. They're really clever. You know what though? So the Argosi books, I love them, very emotional, but I just love the family dynamics that Ilona Andrews has written in these books. I just want to hang out with them all the time. One downside of this book series as well, though, is there are time jumps and you get little hints of the things that happened in those gaps, and I'm still mad that I didn't get to experience those things with the family. I really believe that the Hidden Legacy series could have actually been a much longer series than it really has been, and I'm kind of annoyed that it isn't. But still, I'm going to pick the first 2 books of the Hidden Legacy series as the girls' candidate for Best Book of the Month. So now let's pick the best series continuation. I feel like, again, let's not muck around. We know which one it's going to be. We're putting God Emperor of Dune up against Emerald Blaze and Sapphire Flames. I loved the Hidden Legacy series so much that, of course, it's going to be the winner. I love the writing style so much more. The relationships and the dynamics is so much more interesting, and almost I would say the world is more interesting as well. And maybe it's not as deep and philosophical and scientific ideas about culture or whatever, but it still has some interesting ideas about how you should be approaching life in there. So I'm going to pick the Hidden Legacy books. Now let's put the Hidden Legacy books up against our best new release, which was A Prayer for the Crown Shy. Oh no, this is one of these months where both candidates for Best Book of the Month are ones that I really loved. And this is when we pull out our spreadsheet. I have a feeling I know the winner, but we're just gonna see if the spreadsheet tells me why. Okay, my spreadsheet supports my suspicions, so we're gonna pick A Prayer for the Crown Shy as the best book of the month. I think the Hidden Legacy series, it just took me a little bit to warm up to the characters, and I think as well, even though there are some interesting themes explored within the Hidden Legacy series, like this is all the kinds of ideas that I love to think about, like how could we make the world a better place in this particular way, and just like really looking at what we do as humans and how ridiculous it is. This is the book for that. So please read this duology. It's really beautiful. I don't think it will be a waste of your time, although I know some people haven't enjoyed it, and I'm mystified by how you couldn't enjoy it. But most people have rated it very highly. So if you want a cozy book that really looks at how you might spend your time in a way that would be better, this is the duology for you. Anyway, those are all the books that I read in August. Do let me know if you have read any of these books, because I would love to talk with you about them down in the comments below, or let me know if you think there's another book I might really love based on what I said about these ones. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.